Kethvar stood in the observation deck of the orbital station, watching the planet below through the massive windows. His forearms were folded behind his back in the traditional posture of his people, the Velkari. The planet was called Hadrian Prime, and it was about to become a battlefield. The briefing tablet in his lower right hand displayed his new assignment. Another war, another species to observe, another report to write. In his 70 years of service to the Galactic Confederation Observer Corps, Kethvar had watched 17 different species fight their wars. Some were honorable, some were brutal, all were predictable. This time, he would observe humans. Humans were young to the galactic community. Only 200 years had passed since they left their homeworld and met the other civilizations. They were small, soft-bodied creatures with only 2 arms and 2 legs. They had no natural armor, no venomous bite, no psychic abilities. They were weak by galactic standards. The war below had started 6 months ago. The Vrexians, a powerful reptilian empire, wanted the colony worlds in this sector. The humans refused to give them up. Now, thousands would die to settle the dispute. The Confederation needed to know if humans were worth having on the War Council. That decision required data. That required observers like Kethvar. A transport shuttle carried him down to the surface the next morning. The landing zone was controlled by human forces, and Kethvar could see the fortifications they had built. Concrete barriers, weapon emplacements, trenches dug into the red soil. Standard defensive measures. Nothing impressive. Captain Park Min-jun met him at the landing pad. The human was tall for his species, with dark hair cut very short, and eyes that looked tired even when he smiled. He wore the gray and blue uniform of the Terran Marines, and a patch on his shoulder read, Iron Wolves. Observer Kethvar, Park said, extending his hand in the human greeting gesture. Welcome to hell. Kethvar took the hand carefully. Human skin was warm and soft, so different from his own chitinous exterior. Captain Park, I am here to document your operations against the Vrexian forces. Document away, Park said. Just stay out of the way when the shooting starts. We're holding the mountain pass, 20 kilometers north of here. That's where the action will be. Done. The captain led him to a waiting vehicle. As they drove through the human base, Kethvar made notes on his tablet. The soldiers he saw did not look particularly disciplined. They sat in small groups, talking and laughing. Some were eating. Others were sleeping in the open air. When Captain Park drove past, some saluted, but others just waved casually. Your troops seem relaxed, Kethvar observed. Park laughed. They're scared out of their minds. They just hide it well. We've got a Vrexian force 3 times our size heading this way, and everyone knows it. Then why do they laugh? Because we're still alive to laugh, Park said simply. You laugh while you can. The mountain pass was a narrow canyon called Devil's Throat. Kethvar could see why it was strategically important. It was the only route through the mountains to the colony of New Busan, where 3 million humans lived. If the Vrexians took this pass, those civilians would be in danger. Captain Park's command post was a reinforced bunker built into the canyon wall. Inside, Kethvar met the other key personnel. Lieutenant Choi Seo-yun was a woman with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. She barely looked up from her tactical displays when Kethvar was introduced. She was calculating firing solutions and plotting defensive positions with mechanical precision. Lieutenant Choi is the best tactical officer in the division, Park said with obvious pride. She can calculate artillery trajectories in her head faster than our computers. It is a useful skill, Kethvar said politely. Among the junior soldiers, Kethvar noticed a young man who looked barely old enough to fight. Private First Class. Kim Jae-hoon had a round face and nervous hands that kept checking his weapon. When Park introduced them, the young soldier bowed respectfully. This is only my 2nd deployment, Kim admitted. But I'll do my duty, sir. I'm sure you will, Park said, gripping the boy's shoulder. The 4th person Kethvar met was Dr. Han Ji-woo, the unit's field medic. The doctor was a thin man, with gentle hands and sad eyes. Unlike the others, he carried no weapon, only medical supplies. "I don't believe in killing," Han said when Kethvar asked about it. "I'm here to save lives, not take them." "Even enemy lives?" Kethvar asked. "All lives," Han replied firmly. That evening, Kethvar sat in the command post and reviewed the tactical situation. His analysis was clear. The humans had 400 soldiers holding this pass. The Vrexians were bringing 3,000 shock troops, supported by armored vehicles and air superiority. By every calculation, the humans would be overrun within 6 hours of engagement. He said as much to Captain Park. The captain was eating something called rice and kimchi from a metal container. He paused, considered Kethvar's analysis, and then smiled. "Your math is probably right, observer. But math doesn't account for everything. It accounts for numbers, firepower, and tactical advantage," Kethvar said. "The Vrexians have all three." "They do," Park agreed. "But they don't have what we have." "Which is?" Park looked out at his soldiers. Some were cleaning weapons. Others were writing letters home. A few were singing old songs from Earth. They don't have a reason to be here. This is just another conquest for them, another planet to add to their empire. But us? We're protecting our homes, our families. Everything we love is behind us in that colony. We're not fighting for territory. Observer, we're fighting for each other. Kethvar made a note on his tablet. Humans display emotional attachment to objectives. Unclear if this is tactical advantage or weakness. Park saw the note and laughed. "You'll figure it out soon enough. The Vrexians will be here by dawn." That night, Kethvar could not sleep. He kept thinking about the young soldier, Kim Jae-hoon, nervously checking his weapon. About Dr. Han Ji-woo, who refused to carry a gun. About Lieutenant Choi Seo-yeon, calmly calculating how to kill as many enemies as possible. About Captain Park Min-jun, eating his dinner and smiling like tomorrow wasn't going to be a bloodbath. These humans were strange, illogical. They knew they were going to lose, and yet they showed no signs of retreat or surrender. They just waited for the dawn. Kethvar had observed 17 species at war. He thought he had seen everything. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The Vrexian attack began exactly at dawn, just as Captain Park had predicted. Kethvar was in the observation bunker when the first shells fell. The ground shook, and dust rained from the ceiling. Through the reinforced windows, he could see the canyon filling with smoke and fire. "Contact," Lieutenant Choi announced calmly from her station. 3,000 hostiles advancing from the north. Armor support confirmed. Air units inbound. Captain Park stood at the center of the command post, watching the tactical displays with those tired eyes. He looked completely calm. "All units, hold your fire until they're in the kill zone. Make every shot count." The Vrexians came like a tide of scales and claws. They were large creatures, each one standing over 2 meters tall, with thick armor plating and powerful weapons. They moved in perfect formation, a mark of their military discipline. Kethvar had seen the Vrexians fight before. They were efficient killers. The humans waited. And waited. The Vrexians came closer, filling the narrow canyon. Still, the humans held their fire. "Now," Park said quietly. The canyon erupted in fire. Human artillery, hidden in the cliff walls, opened up all at once. Machine gun positions that had been invisible suddenly came alive. Mines buried in the canyon floor exploded in sequence. The front ranks of the Vrexian force disappeared in smoke and flame, but the Vrexians kept coming. They were warriors bred for combat, and they did not break easily. They returned fire with heavy plasma weapons that melted rock and metal. One of the human bunkers took a direct hit and simply vanished in a ball of superheated air. "Section 3 is gone," Lieutenant Choi reported, no emotion in her voice. Just facts. 17 casualties. Kethvar watched the battle unfold with professional detachment. This was going exactly as his calculations predicted. The humans were inflicting damage, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. It was only a matter of time. Then the Vrexian airstrike came. 3 attack craft screamed down from the sky and targeted the human ammunition depot. The missiles hit with precision, and the depot exploded in a fireball that lit up the entire canyon. Secondary explosions followed as stored artillery shells cooked off. Kethvar calculated quickly. The humans had just lost 70% of their ammunition. That's bad, Park said, which Kethvar thought was a considerable understatement. You should order a retreat, Kethvar said. You cannot hold this position without ammunition. Park looked at him like he had suggested something insane. Retreat to where? There's 3 million people behind us. No, observer. We hold the line. With what weapons? Park smiled grimly. With whatever we can find. Over the next hour, Kethvar watched something he had never seen before. The humans began scavenging weapons from fallen Vrexian soldiers. Private Kim Jae-hoon and his squad crawled out into the killing zone between firing positions, dodging plasma fire, to retrieve enemy weapons. They dragged the heavy Vrexian rifles back to their positions and figured out how to use them through trial and error. The grip is different, Kim shouted to his squadmates. Hold it like this. The trigger is here. Watch the recoil. It's stronger than ours. Within minutes, the humans were using Vrexian weapons against the Vrexians. It was desperate and improvised, but it worked. The battle continued for hours. The sun climbed high, and then began to fall. The Vrexians kept pushing, and the humans kept holding. Kethvar updated his casualty estimates every hour. The numbers were devastating. 200 humans dead, then 250, then 300. Lieutenant Choi was still at her post, calling out targeting solutions even though half the artillery was destroyed. Then Kethvar saw her stumble. She caught herself on the console, and he saw blood on her uniform. She had been hit. Lieutenant, you need medical attention, Park said. I can still work, Choi said. She pulled herself upright and continued calculating firing solutions. Blood dripped onto her keyboard, but her fingers kept moving. Dr. Han Ji-woo was everywhere at once. Kethvar watched the doctor run from position to position, treating the wounded under fire. The man had no weapon, no armor, just medical supplies, and what appeared to be absolutely no sense of self-preservation. He pulled soldiers out of collapsed bunkers. He treated wounds in open trenches while plasma fire zipped overhead. At one point, Han found a wounded Vrexian soldier in the canyon. The enemy warrior had been abandoned by his unit, left to die. Han dragged him to cover and began treating his wounds. What are you doing? Kethvar asked. That is the enemy. That is a patient, Han said, not looking up from his work. His hands were steady as he sealed the Vrexian's wounds. I don't care what side he's on. He's hurt, and I can help. The Vrexian soldier stared at Han with confused reptilian eyes, unable to understand why a human would save him. 18 hours into the battle, Captain Park's force was down to 127 effective soldiers. The Vrexians had taken heavy casualties, but they still had overwhelming numbers. Kethvar could see the enemy commander preparing for a final assault. Captain, Kethvar said, you have done well, but this is over. You must surrender or retreat while you still can. Park was looking at the tactical display. His uniform was torn and bloody. His face was covered in dust and smoke. But when he turned to look at Kethvar, those tired eyes were fierce. We don't retreat, he said. All units, prepare to advance. Advance? Kethvar couldn't believe what he was hearing. You have barely 100 soldiers left against over 1,000 Vrexians. This is suicide. Crossed again. Crossed again. Maybe, Park said, but they'll remember us. Iron wolves, on me. We're going to show these scaled bastards what humans do when we're cornered. What happened next would stay with Kethvar for the rest of his life. The humans charged. 127 exhausted, wounded, desperate soldiers charged straight into the center of the Vrexian force. They used captured weapons, improvised explosives, and in some cases, just their bare hands and combat knives. They were singing. Kethvar could hear them over the sound of weapons fire. Old songs from Earth, in languages he didn't understand. But the meaning was clear. They were not afraid. They were defiant. Private Kim Jae-hoon was among them. The young soldier who had been so nervous yesterday was running toward the enemy lines, carrying an explosive charge. Kethvar watched as Kim reached a critical bridge that the Vrexians were using to bring in reinforcements. The boy planted the charge, and then Kethvar realized with horror that Kim wasn't running away. He was staying with it. The bridge exploded. The Vrexian advance collapsed. Private Kim Jae-hoon was gone. The human charge broke the Vrexian formation. It made no sense. It defied every rule of warfare Kethvar knew. But somehow, impossibly, the Vrexians began to fall back. They retreated. The humans had won. When the firing finally stopped, Kethvar walked out into the canyon. 89 humans had survived. The rest were dead or dying. Dr. Han was moving among the wounded, trying to save whoever he could. Lieutenant Choi had collapsed at her station and had to be carried out. She had kept working with 17 separate wounds. Captain Park was kneeling beside the ruins of the bridge, where Private Kim had made his sacrifice. The captain was crying, actual tears running down his face. When he saw Kethvar approaching, he didn't try to hide it. He was 22 years old. Park said quietly, "I knew his mother. I knew his little sister. What am I going to tell them?" Kethvar had no answer. He returned to his observation post and began writing his report. His hands were shaking, which had never happened before in 17 wars. He wrote, "Humans display category Omega irrationality in combat. They do not retreat when logic demands it. They do not surrender when defeat is certain. They charge when they should flee. Recommended observation distance. Maximum safe range." But even as he wrote it, Kethvar knew those words couldn't capture what he had witnessed. The humans hadn't won because of superior tactics or technology. They had won because they simply refused to lose. They had decided that this line would not be crossed, and they had been willing to die to make it true. And that terrified him more than any weapon ever could. 2 weeks after the battle at Devil's Throat, Kethvar found himself aboard the medical frigate called Mercy's Hand. The ship orbited Hadrian Prime, treating the wounded from both sides of the conflict. The Confederation had assigned him to continue his observations. But Kethvar's mission had changed. He no longer just wanted to document human combat effectiveness. He needed to understand it. The numbers didn't make sense. 400 humans against 3,000 Vrexians. Mathematical certainty said the humans should have lost. But they hadn't. And Kethvar needed to know why. Lieutenant Choi So-yeon was in Medical Bay 7, recovering from her 17 wounds. The doctors said she would survive, though she would carry scars for the rest of her life. When Kethvar entered her room, she was sitting up in bed, working on a tablet. Even injured, she could not stop working. "Lieutenant," Kethvar said, "I have questions. If you are able to answer." Choi looked up. Her face was pale, and bandages covered most of her upper body. But her eyes were as sharp as ever. "Ask." "Observer, during the battle, your position became untenable. You were wounded. You had no support. Standard military doctrine for every species in the Confederation says you should have retreated. Why didn't you?" Choi looked confused by the question. "Retreat to where?" "My squad was dead. The position had to be held. So, I held it. But you could have died." "Yes," she said simply. "But if I left, the Vrexians would have flanked our main line. More of my friends would have died. The civilians behind us would have been in danger. What kind of officer abandons her post?" Kethvar made notes. "You value Duty over self-preservation. I value the people counting on me, Choi corrected. She pulled up an image on her tablet and showed it to him. It was a photograph of a school, children playing in a yard. New Busan Elementary School. My two nieces go there. That's what was behind our line. That's what I was protecting. She put the tablet down and looked directly at Kethvar. Observer, I don't think you understand. We weren't just defending territory. We were defending our families, our homes, everything that matters. You don't retreat from that. You can't. Oer. Aksazatter. After and. In Medical Bay 12, Kethvar found Dr. Han Ji-woo. The doctor was not a patient, but he looked like he should be. He sat in a chair, staring at nothing. His hands shook constantly. The medical staff said he had not slept in 3 days. They called it post-traumatic stress disorder. Dr. Han, Kethvar said gently. May I speak with you? Han looked up slowly. His eyes were red and empty. Kethvar sat. I watched you during the battle. You ran into enemy fire repeatedly to save wounded soldiers. You treated a Vrexian soldier even though he was your enemy. I need to understand why. Your behavior was extremely dangerous. I'm a doctor, Han said. His voice was flat, emotionless. I save lives. That's what I do. But why risk your own life? Han was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Do you know what it's like to hold a 22-year-old boy while he bleeds out? To feel him stop breathing in your arms? To know you can't save him? He looked at his shaking hands. I held Private Kim before he went on that charge. He was scared. So scared. But he went anyway. He died for us. How can I do less? How can I not risk everything to save others when they risk everything for me? Was it worth it? Kethvar asked. The victory. Han broke down then. Tears streamed down his face. Ask me that, when I can sleep without seeing their faces. Ask me when I stop hearing them call for their mothers. Ask me when my hands stop shaking. He wiped his eyes. We won. We saved the colony. But I keep thinking about all the soldiers I couldn't save, all the ones who died while I was trying to reach them. Was it worth it? I don't know. I don't know. Endincent. I don't know. Endincent. Kethvar left feeling worse than when he entered. He had thought understanding humans would make them less frightening. Instead, he was learning that their strength came from their pain. They fought so hard because they felt so deeply. They won because they cared so much that losing was unthinkable. Captain Park Min-jun was not in the medical wing. He had been discharged after treatment for minor wounds. Kethvar found him in his quarters, on the frigate. The captain's room was small and plain, but one wall was covered in photographs. Hundreds of them. My wall of ghosts, Park said when he saw Kethvar looking. Every soldier I've lost in 6 campaigns. 247 faces. I remember every name, every family, every last word. Kethvar looked at the photographs. So many young faces. Why do you keep them? 2. Because someone has to remember. Park said. These people gave everything. The least I can do is make sure they're not forgotten. He pointed to a fresh photograph that had been added. Private Kim Jae-hoon, smiling in his uniform. This one hurts the most. I knew his mother. I promised her I'd bring him home safe. And I didn't. He died saving hundreds of others. Kethvar said. I know. His mother knows too. But that doesn't make it hurt less. Park sat down heavily. The Terran military wants to give me the Star of Valor, the highest military decoration, for leadership in battle. You know what I did? I asked them to give it to Kim's family instead. They said no. You can't transfer medals to the dead. You carry great burden, Kethvar observed. That's what command means for humans, Park said. It's not just about tactics and strategy. It's about knowing that every order you give might get someone killed. It's about living with those decisions. It's about remembering their faces. Revel. Ungol. He stood and walked to a window that looked out at Hadrian Prime. Your people want to know if humans are worthy of the War Council. If we can be trusted with military power. Let me tell you something, Observer. We don't want war. We hate it. Every human who fights carries the weight of what we do. We remember every person we kill. We mourn every person we lose. War destroys us even when we win. Then why do you fight? Kethvar asked. Park turned to face him. Because sometimes the alternative is worse. Because there are things worth dying for. Because if we don't stand up for what matters, then what's the point of anything? He pointed at the photographs. These people understood that. They died for it. That's what makes us human. Kethvar spent the next week reviewing his interviews and observations. He compiled data. He ran calculations. He tried to make sense of what he had witnessed, but the more he analyzed, the less he understood. Humans were irrational. They fought against impossible odds. They refused to surrender, even when defeat was certain. They valued abstract concepts like honor and duty over their own survival. By every logical measure, this should make them weak. But they were not weak. They were terrifying. Then Kethvar received new orders from the Confederation. A major Vrexian offensive was being planned against the human colony world of Incheon 7. The Confederation wanted him to observe this new battle. They wanted to know if Devil's Throat was a unique incident or a pattern of behavior. For the first time in his 70 years of service, Kethvar requested reassignment. He did not want to watch more humans die. He did not want to see more faces like Dr. Hans, broken by trauma. He did not want to see more walls like Captain Park's, covered in photographs of the dead. His request was denied. The mission was too important. The Confederation needed to understand humanity, and Kethvar was their best observer, so he prepared to go to Incheon the 7. He prepared to watch another battle, another victory bought with blood and pain and sacrifice. He prepared to witness horrors he could not unsee and learn truths he did not want to know. He had thought Devil's Throat was the worst of humanity's warfare. He was about to learn that humans could go so much further when truly threatened. And that knowledge would haunt him forever. 3 months after Devil's Throat, Kethvar arrived at Incheon 7. This time, he was aboard an observation ship in high orbit, far from the fighting. He had requested the maximum safe distance. After what he witnessed at Devil's Throat, he wanted no part of being on the ground. Incheon 7 was an agricultural world. 8 million humans lived there, mostly farmers and their families. Rolling fields of crops stretched across continents. Small cities dotted the landscape. It was peaceful. Beautiful, even. The Vrexian Dominion was going to destroy it. The Vrexian Third Fleet arrived like a hammer from the void. 50 capital ships. Hundreds of fighters. Orbital bombardment platforms that could glass a city in minutes. And 50,000 ground troops. The elite of the Vrexian military. They were not here for a small raid. They were here for conquest. The human defense force consisted of 8,000 regular military personnel and hastily trained militia. Captain Park Min-jun, now promoted to colonel, had been given command of planetary defense. Kethvar watched through his observation screens as Park coordinated the defense from a bunker beneath the capital city. The first day, the Vrexians established orbital superiority. Human ships fought bravely but were outnumbered 5-1. They died in fire and silence, brief sparks against the darkness of space. By nightfall, the Vrexians controlled the sky. The second day, the orbital bombardment began. Military targets first. Command posts. Weapon depots. Communication arrays. The humans could only hide and endure. Kethvar watched through his sensors as entire military bases vanished under bombardment. The mathematics were clear. The humans would lose. The third day, the Vrexians deployed their biological weapon. Kethvar detected it immediately. A nerve agent, released over a civilian district. Not designed to kill quickly. Designed to cause terror. Slow, agonizing death over hours. Screaming that could be heard for kilometers. Children dying in their parents' arms. The Vrexians wanted to break human morale before the ground invasion even began. Instead, they made a terrible mistake. Colonel Park's face appeared on every screen, every broadcast, across the entire planet. He was speaking to the Vrexian commander. Not his own troops. "Commander Vrath," Park said. His voice was cold. Kethvar had never heard a human voice so empty of warmth. "You have used chemical weapons on civilians. You have crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. I am giving you one chance. Surrender now. Withdraw your forces and face trial for war crimes, or face the consequences." The Vrexian commander laughed. Kethvar could hear it through the transmission. "You are beaten, human. Accept your defeat with dignity." "Last chance," Park said. The Vrexians laughed again and cut the transmission. What happened next would be analyzed by military historians across the galaxy for generations. The humans did not just defend. They attacked. Every single human on Incheon 7 became part of the war effort. Kethvar watched through his sensors, with growing horror as the civilian population mobilized. Farmers converted their agricultural equipment into weapons. Plows became battering rams. Harvesters became mobile fortresses. Chemical fertilizers became explosives. Elderly veterans, men and women who had fought in wars decades ago, came out of retirement. They trained the militia. They taught civilians how to fight, how to hide, how to kill. Children as young as 12 served as runners and scouts, moving through areas too dangerous for adults. The underground resistance cells struck first. They had been organizing since the moment the Vrexians arrived. Now, they emerged. Supply convoys were ambushed. Landing zones were sabotaged. Vrexian officers were assassinated in their own camps. The Vrexians thought they were fighting an army of 8,000. They were fighting a planet of 8 million. Lieutenant Choi Seo-yeon, barely recovered from her wounds at Devil's Throat, led a suicide mission. Her squad of 50 volunteers infiltrated the Vrexian orbital bombardment platform. They could not take it intact, so they destroyed it from within. The platform exploded in a fireball visible from the surface. 47 of the 50 volunteers died, including Choi. But the orbital bombardment stopped. The human fleet, what little remained of it, changed tactics. They could not win in direct combat, so they stopped trying. Instead, they became kamikazes. Human ships, badly damaged and dying, would accelerate to ramming speed and drive directly into Vrexian capital ships. The Vrexians had better shields, better armor, better weapons, but they could not stop a 10,000-ton missile made of metal and desperation and human spite. 3 Vrexian capital ships died this way. Then 5. Then 8. The Vrexian fleet began to pull back from close orbit. They were winning the battle, but the victory was costing too much. On the ground, Colonel Park unleashed unconventional warfare. When the Vrexians used biological weapons, Park responded with chemical weapons that made the Vrexian biology shut down in agony. When the Vrexians targeted civilians, Park targeted Vrexian supply lines and left enemy troops to starve in hostile territory. Dr. Han Ji-woo was there, still traumatized from Devil's Throat, still refusing to carry a weapon. But he worked 72-hour shifts, treating wounded soldiers and civilians. He treated Vrexian prisoners too, even after what their commanders had done. The other doctors asked him why. He said, "Because someone has to remember we're not monsters. Even in this hell, someone has to remember." Kethvar watched a battle unlike anything in his experience. The Vrexians were winning on paper. They controlled most of the planet. They had superior numbers. But they were bleeding. Every kilometer cost them. Every city was a meat grinder. The humans fought for every street, every building, every room. And when they could no longer hold, they destroyed everything as they retreated. Scorched earth. Nothing left for the enemy. The worst moment came on day 40 of the siege. A human division, 3,000 soldiers, was defending an evacuation route. Civilian refugees were fleeing to the southern continent, where human forces still held control. The Vrexians concentrated their forces to cut the evacuation route. Colonel Park ordered the division to hold the line, to give the civilians time to escape. The soldiers knew what that meant. They were being sacrificed. There would be no retreat, no rescue. They were going to die to buy time. They did it anyway. 3,000 soldiers stood against 20,000 Vrexians for 18 hours. They fought until their ammunition ran out. Then they fought with knives and fists and rocks and teeth. Of the 3,000, 17 survived. But 200,000 civilians reached safety. Kethvar felt something break inside him as he watched. This was not war as he understood it. This was something else. Something primal and terrible and magnificent. The humans were not fighting to win anymore. They were fighting because they could not stop. Because stopping meant accepting the unacceptable. The siege lasted 67 days. When it finally ended, the Vrexians withdrew. Not because they had lost. They were still militarily superior. They withdrew because the cost had become unbearable. Every victory was purchased with so much blood that it felt like defeat. The Vrexians had never encountered an enemy like this. An enemy that simply would not break. The final casualty count was devastating. 2 million human civilians dead. 6,400 military personnel killed. Entire cities reduced to rubble. An entire generation traumatized. The planet was a graveyard, and the humans started rebuilding the next day. Kethvar's observation ship was damaged by orbital debris. He was forced to land on Incheon the 7th to make repairs. He walked through the ruins of the capital city, and what he saw broke something in him that would never heal. Everywhere, humans were clearing rubble, burying their dead, planting new crops in soil mixed with ash and blood. They were not celebrating their victory. They were mourning their losses, but they were also building. Already. Their dead were not even buried yet, and they were rebuilding. A young girl, no more than 10 years old, approached him. She held out a small flower, growing in the rubble. "For you," she said. Kethvar took the flower with shaking hands. "Where is your family?" "Are gone," she said simply. "Everyone's gone. But I'm still here, so I have to keep going. That's what my mother would want." She walked away to help clear debris. A child who should be playing was instead rebuilding a broken world. And she was not crying. She was working. Kethvar stood in the ruins and finally understood. Humans did not win because they were strong. They won because they were survivors. And survivors do not give up. Not ever. Not even when everything is lost. Especially not then. He returned to his ship and began writing his report. But his hands shook so badly he could barely type. He had witnessed the worst of war. And somehow, impossibly, he had also witnessed the best of humanity. He wished with every fiber of his being that he had never come to Incheon the 7, because now he understood what humans were capable of, and that knowledge would haunt him forever. 6 months after the siege of Incheon the 7th, Kethvar stood before the Galactic Confederation High Council. The chamber was enormous, with representatives from 47 species arranged in a circle. They had gathered to hear his final report on humanity, to decide if humans deserved a seat on the War Council, to decide if humans were allies or threats. Kethvar had spent half a year compiling his data. Numbers, tactical analyses, combat footage, interviews. Everything the council needed to make their decision. But as he looked at the faces of the council members, he realized that numbers could not capture what he had witnessed. Honored Council, he began. You asked me to observe humanity at war, to assess their military capabilities and temperament. I have done this. What I will share with you is difficult. He activated the holographic display. Combat footage from Devil's Throat appeared, showing 400 humans holding against 3,000 Vrexians. He showed them the ammunition depot exploding. He showed them humans charging into certain death. He showed them Private Kim Jae-hoon staying on the bridge as it exploded. Human combat effectiveness is 847% above our predictive models, Kethvar said. They have no measurable casualty tolerance limit. They fight past the point where any other species would surrender. They adapt tactics within minutes. They learn to use captured enemy weapons faster than any species I have observed in 70 years of service. He showed them footage from Incheon VII, the civilian population mobilizing, ships ramming into Vrexian cruisers, Lieutenant Choi Seo-yun's final transmission before the orbital platform exploded, 3,000 soldiers dying to save 200,000 refugees. They have no breaking point. Kethvar continued. I have seen humans fight until nothing remains. And then they fight with that nothing. They convert farming equipment into weapons. They turn their own bodies into weapons when necessary. Every human becomes a soldier when their home is threatened. A council member from the Xerath species raised a tentacle. Observer Kethvar. By your own assessment, humans sound like a Category Alpha threat, too dangerous to coexist with. Why should we allow them on the War Council? Kethvar had anticipated this question. He changed the holographic display. It now showed Dr. Han Ji-woo treating a wounded Vrexian soldier, showed human soldiers sharing their food rations with Vrexian prisoners, showed Colonel Park adopting 3 Vrexian orphans after the siege, children whose parents had died in the fighting. Because humans are not just warriors, Kethvar said. They are paradoxical. They are capable of extreme violence, but also extreme compassion. They will die for abstract concepts like honor and duty, but they will also risk their lives to save their enemies. He told them about Dr. Han, who refused to carry weapons but saved lives on both sides. About Lieutenant Choi, who calculated how to kill thousands but died protecting civilians. About young Private Kim, who sacrificed himself to save people he had never met. About Colonel Park, who kept photographs of every soldier he had lost and remembered every name. Humans have something they call a warrior's code, Kethvar explained. Even in war, they maintain rules. They respect the dead. They honor worthy enemies. They refuse to become monsters even when fighting monsters. This is not weakness. This is strength, because it means humans can be reasoned with. They can be trusted. They keep their word, even when it costs them. Another council member spoke. But observer, if humans are so dangerous, how can we ensure they will not turn that danger on us? This was the critical question. Kethvar took a breath. Honored Council, I will be direct. We must never make enemies of humanity. This is not a suggestion. It is a survival imperative. He showed them the final footage from Incheon VII, the ruins, the 2 million dead, the traumatized survivors rebuilding. Humans do not fight to win. They fight until there is nothing left to fight with. And then, they fight anyway. They do not have a warrior culture like the Vrexians or the Kresh. They have a survivor culture. And survivors never give up. Never. He paused, gathering his courage for what he had to say next. If the Confederation ever goes to war with humanity, we will not win. Even if we destroy their fleets, even if we conquer their worlds, even if we kill 99% of them, that last 1% will keep fighting. They will fight until we are broken, or they are extinct. There is no middle ground with humans. They are the best allies you could want, or the worst enemies you could imagine. The council chamber was silent. Kethvar could see the representatives processing this information. Fear on some faces, calculation on others, respect on a few. My recommendation is this, Kethvar said. Grant humanity a permanent seat on the War Council. Give them full alliance status. But more importantly, never, under any circumstances, give them a reason to consider us enemies. The council deliberated for 3 days. Kethvar waited, reviewing his footage again and again. The faces of the humans he had met. Park Min-jun, with his wall of photographs. Choi Seo-yeon calculating trajectories while bleeding from 17 wounds. Dr. Han Ji-woo, treating everyone, regardless of species. Young Kim Jae-hoon, who never got to see his 23rd birthday. On the 3rd day, the council reached their decision. Humanity would receive a permanent War Council seat with full voting rights. But there was a classified directive added to the Confederation's highest security files. Kethvar was allowed to read it. In the event of open conflict between the Galactic Confederation and the Terran systems, the recommended course of action is immediate unconditional surrender. No species that fights like humanity can be defeated, only survived. Containment is not possible. Victory is not possible. Only mutual destruction is possible. Therefore, conflict must be avoided at all costs. Kethvar read those words and felt a chill. The Confederation had just admitted they were afraid of humans. Not because humans were cruel or evil, but because humans simply would not stop, could not stop. After the decision was announced, Kethvar retired from the Observer Corps. He was only 70 years old, young for his species. He suffered from something the human doctors called post-traumatic stress disorder. Nightmares. Hypervigilance. Survivor's guilt. His people had no name for these conditions because war observers were supposed to be detached. Clinical. Emotionless. But Kethvar had stopped being detached at Devil's Throat. He had become invested. He had started caring. And now he paid the price. Dr. Han Ji-woo heard about his condition. The human doctor sent him a message. What you're experiencing, we call PTSD. Welcome to being human. Here's the good news. We survived this too. You're not alone. If you need to talk, I'm here. Kethvar cried when he read that message. A human. Traumatized by the same wars Kethvar had witnessed. Offering comfort. Offering kinship. This was what made humans dangerous. Not their weapons or their tactics. Their refusal to let anyone suffer alone. Their insistence on caring, even when it hurt. Years later, Kethvar traveled to Incheon VII. The planet had been rebuilt. New cities stood where ruins had been. Fields of crops waved in the breeze. Children played in parks built on ground that had been soaked with blood. You would never know a war had happened here. Except for the memorial. It stretched for kilometers. Walls of black stone engraved with names. 2,006,847 names. Every civilian and soldier who died in the siege. Kethvar walked slowly, reading the names. He found Lieutenant Choi Seo-yeon. Found the 3,000 soldiers who held the evacuation route. Found thousands of names he had never known but who had died while he watched. An elderly human man stood beside him. It took Kethvar a moment to recognize Colonel Park Min-jun. The years had aged him. Gray hair now. Deeper lines on his face. But those same tired, fierce eyes, they stood together in silence, looking at the names. No words were needed. They had both witnessed the same horror. They both carried the same weight. In the distance, children played. The flower gardens around the memorial were blooming. Life continuing. Life rebuilding. Life refusing to surrender to death and despair. Do you regret it? Kethvar asked quietly. All the sacrifices. All the death. Do you regret fighting? Park was quiet for a long moment. Every single day, he said. I see their faces every night. I hear them calling for help. I remember every name on these walls. He paused. But if I could go back, knowing everything, I would do it again. Because those children playing over there exist because we fought. This planet exists because we refuse to give up. Sometimes the cost of fighting is unbearable, but the cost of not fighting is worse. Kethvar understood. This was the truth of humanity. They paid terrible prices for their victories. They carried unimaginable burdens. They suffered in ways that would break other species. But they survived. They endured. They rebuilt. They kept going. I was sent to watch humans in war, Kethvar said. I wish I hadn't gone. Because now I understand something that terrifies me. You don't fight because you're strong. You fight because you're survivors. And survivors never give up. Park nodded slowly. Now, you understand us. For better or worse. They stood together as the sun set over Incheon 7. Two beings from different worlds, bonded by shared trauma and shared understanding. The memorial cast long shadows in the fading light, and in those shadows, 2 million names bore silent witness to the price of survival, to the cost of refusing to surrender, to the terrible, magnificent, incomprehensible determination of humanity. Kethvar would carry those names with him for the rest of his life, just like the humans did. Because, in watching them at war, he had learned to be a little bit human himself. And humans never forget, never forgive, never give up. Not ever.